what those ideas might be. So before kind of turning it over to a member of our team here to first talk about our first mission priority, I probably a lot of you will have questions about what are next steps, even assuming you love what you see on the page or kind of what's going to happen next with them. So we'll come back to that at the end. I think that will make a little bit more sense than talking about it now, but just know that we know you'll have questions about that, and we will kind of cover that off at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to Corey to talk about mission priority number 1. And I will put the text of this mission priority up in the chat. So if it's hard for you to see the whole document, you can just keep your eye on the chat if you want to see just what we're talking about right now.
Okay, thanks for the intro, Rebecca. And just as a frame of reference, I thought to hit record at the end of your introduction so that we can have it for other people. So sorry if anybody's listening to the recording and you're a little lost on the introduction, but you, the rest of it will be documented for people who couldn't be here, thinking particularly about our Sunday school teachers. Anyways, so our first mission priority, can you guys can hear me? Okay, good. Thank you for the head nod, because I still have Rebecca as looking in my camera, who's the center speaker at the moment. So, okay, so the first mission priority we identified was the opening up and use of our buildings to a wide array of activities and events. So what this looks like is things like opening up our buildings and using our buildings for things that are hosted by Centralites, meaning like potlucks, or using the sanctuary for public events that, like we would have hosted Lenny Duncan as a public, Pastor Lenny Duncan as a public event, right, that we hosted. Funerals and weddings and this sort of thing. So things that we sponsor and activities that we put forward, but then also having our building used as we sort of have in the past, but really continuing to open up with having third-party hosts, allowing people to, kids' musical recitals, or really sort of identifying, like in this COVID time, how many people have had backyard outdoor events with their communities, who live in houses, who have backyards, whereas, our neighbors for our church don't necessarily have that. Our courtyard is something that could be available for the church neighbors that don't have that kind of space. Being an idea in that regard. Businesses using as a meeting space, this sort of thing, just having the space used by the local community. And then kind of the third tier is really partnering with organizations that share our mission priorities. And this is really kind of identifying, much in the way like the community lunch, that this is a mission priority of ours, but not something that we have the bandwidth or the skill set or the to be able to actually carry out that activity. So really looking to partner with others that have similar mission priorities and for use of the building to further those, our desires and mission priorities. So what this is really looking at that from our past, like using our buildings and having our buildings be in use is really honoring the people and the members who have come before us, right? And ourselves, and what their desires were, and to say that we have this this space that to be really good stewards of, and to be good stewards of it means that it is being of use and going out. What this isn't, it's not a direct call to, a specific way that we're using it. We didn't really, as Rebecca said, like, this is just the big fat stick, but we haven't like winnowed it down to who exactly and or what those partners are, but really continuing to focus on that. And I think really probably everybody here knows this is a conversation we've been in desire around, is how to continue to have those buildings be put to use. But yeah, so just sort of moving forward with that and kind of taking it on in ways, just allowing ourselves to try out things and have it not necessarily, maybe it is the thing that, like the community lunch, gee, that worked for a very long time, or we're trying out some things and some things may pop and we try out and do, and then we come to realize this isn't quite it, and that's okay, right? That we can move through, and that allowing God and allowing the Spirit to help direct us and learn as we go. And I think the other piece that goes into this is the other thing that it is and it isn't is it's acknowledging, like this sacred space of our that makes us different, right, than say the coffee shop next door. But it isn't a call of like how we're going to change the buildings or not. That still kind of remains to be seen, but holding in that kind of mission priority of being a place of faith and that place of sanctuary. So I think that's all I have, Rebecca.
Okay. I will, having said that we're not going to focus on the findings, I will note one here that I think was really an aha moment for a lot of folks, and really relates to this one in particular, although it really relates to all of them. But we've heard from many people a perception that we used to do a lot of social justice and now we don't, kind of a feeling that what social justice means is something that we're kind of not doing anymore. And one topic that we talked about a lot at the workshop and that was really resonated with people is Appa getting you on Sunday school? Okay, Appa will get you on Sunday school. Sorry. That there's different ways to think about what does social justice work look like. And kind of it became shorthand in our discussions, but being the person who's physically handing out the socks in the park is one way, but it's not the only way. And it does seem like we used to do more of the direct hands-on work ourselves in our congregation, kind of, and I'm thinking way far in the past. So to a certain extent, this is my own perception of maybe even a time before I was there. So it could be inaccurate. But that now, kind of given like the changes in work life, where people live, the fact that we don't have a huge population of stay-at-home parents, kind of people available during the daytime, that being the hands-on doers doesn't quite fit with us anymore. So I think that's kind of part of why when you see a lot of ideas for building use here, you see a ton of ideas, but they're not all about kind of us coming together and engaging in direct service from our property ourselves. We may want to find partners, kind of continuing the model that we've used with the lunch for the last 20 years or so, where we're a strong partner with them. We provide space at below market rate, we provide financial help, but we're just providing some volunteer effort, a pretty small part of their hours actually, not at all the majority of it. So that may be the type of model that we want to look for here. But as I said, I think the aha moment was kind of like naming that and embracing it and not seeing it as a flaw, but just recognizing it's a different way to carry out that mission. Any questions or reactions from the group to this one before we go on to number 2?
I guess I just want to say that oftentimes when we've had discussions about the building use, it's been more around generating income in our past. And it was actually kind of nice and refreshing to hear it linked to our mission in terms of, expanding the idea of the justice work that we maybe want to do. So yeah, thank you for that.
Nice.
And this may not be directly related to social justice, but I know that,
Building, we're talking about the building right now.
yeah, but it's not a social justice purpose for the building, but I think Nick is planning on having his recital in the space. He really likes the space as far as the acoustic. And there may be some other requests from the university to use this space. I don't know how we negotiate that as far as cost to us and cost to them. But that's something to look at. There is a problem with some of the scheduling of the use of either of those buildings is because I believe that Sandy's a little reluctant to take on that task.
Yeah, but it's not in Sandy's job description. And so, so staff does, I was going to make two comments, John, but you finish what you're saying, and then I want to add to what you're saying.
Well, I'm glad that you pointed out that it isn't in Sandy's job description. I don't know where that responsibility would lie, but I think that if we get more community into the building, they'll be less afraid to enter it later on when church is going on.
Yeah. I wanted to make two quick points, and one is this is the most familiar of the 3 points. This has been so consistent for so long. It was just loud and clear in all the visioning task force discussions and in our final report. And it was, you can go way back to the 2001 long range planning report. And we've had this consistent desire, and too often in the past decade, the excuse, the reason for not opening up the building more has been staff. And that really doesn't need to be a barrier. It's definitely never been in Sandy's job description. And now it could be in the facility, the combination of the facilities manager position and the caretaker position, or something else, or the partners we work with can be their own security. I mean, that was the case with Icon Church, very independent. The pastor took full responsibility for all comings and goings and did a beautiful job of that we had no problems with security with Icon. So there are a lot of different ways this can play out without changing our budget or our staff.
I really appreciate all the comments and kind of that focus on what might this look like. And I also really appreciate the sort of broad brush approach to the discernment document, so that we don't know exactly what it might look like. It might look like something really radical, like let's make housing out of it, or it might look like smaller steps, or and it's very open. And I really appreciate that. Like there's this strong desire that we use these assets that we're stewards of to foster community, social justice, all kinds of things, but we don't know what that'll look like. And I really appreciate that element in this document.
Okay, great. These are terrific comments, and I've been taking note of them. I think in interest of time, and I think some of these are particularly sort of the logistical pieces that you raised, John. Those are really important, and they have been barriers in the past. But I think with a little bit of just kind of focus and thought, we can move past them. It just kind of needs just a little bit of a workflow here. Some folks to think about kind of what are the steps, kind of is, obviously there should be kind of a document that's like, here's the checklist for if somebody wants to use the building. Here's we think about it. Here's how we staff it. And I see a lot of heads nodding. So I think we've got a collective will that we can probably figure those pieces out. One question I had for you, when you mentioned the university, is that University of Washington or Seattle University? And love to hear a little bit more about what you know from someone who may have a desire to use it.
Well, Nick is the one that has the desire to use it.
Okay.
Apparently there's difficulty with space at the university for recitals. And this is the current situation right now, that he's already set up so that he can participate in a Zoom presentation, which most of these recitals are at this point.
Oh, yeah.
It's the University of Washington. That's where he's doing his
Okay.
doctorate.
That's great.
Just their School of Music, just a place to have it. So.
And on these kind of use ideas that are about kind of someone else in the community, not really a central sponsored activity, a great way to begin is exactly through things like this, kind of existing connections. We don't need to like place an ad in the paper, like open for rent. Because it's people who have these connections that will be interested in giving it a try. So as we move forward, I think building on connections like that and encouraging folks to think that way will be an excellent way to begin. Okay, let's move on then to number 2. And I think I remember correctly, Claire, you're going to kick us off on this one.
So mission priority number 2 was focusing our social justice work on anti-racism. So obviously this is something that a lot of us feel passionate about right now. While we still also want to maintain our focus on inclusion and working with LGBTQ community, which has been very important to us historically. So what this is, specifically, we are talking about working first within Central to become a more expansive congregation. So I think some of you guys know the language of expansion, but this is talking about not just like making us inclusive, which inherently still has like an us and a them component. So we're including them, but expansive is all of us are the us. So there's less of the us and them feeling there. So specifically, how we think we should go about doing this is working on ourselves and identifying exclusionary language and iconography that may be excluding people of color and LGBTQ folks from being part of our community. And just working really hard to celebrate and include those who may not feel welcome elsewhere, which is something that Central has been really focused on from the beginning. But what this isn't necessarily, this focus isn't quite thinking about putting our feet on the ground and going to marches. Of course, we can do that. We can do that as individuals, we can do that as a group. But this mission is mostly thinking about understanding what we need to do to work on ourselves before we start that conversation. This is something that a lot of people have been talking about, reading like the anti-racism books. There's a lot of things that we still need to work on within our community that people within our community may not feel as included as we would like them to. So we want to work on understanding how we can make ourselves a more inclusive environment before kind of going out and imposing our inclusion on someone else. So that's kind of the focus of this this mission priority. I don't know if any of the other folks wanted to chime in on this priority, but basically anti-racism specifically, but also just inclusion in general and expansion within our own work. Did I pretty much get it, Rebecca? Or
I think so. Yeah, I'd be happy to have either Corey, Erica. I'm not sure if I've seen Sarah join yet, but anyone else from the team join in. In my mind, I think the thing, it might look like this is just ART right here, and certainly there's a huge amount of overlap there, which is intentional. We wanted to really take up and honor a topic that has generated a great deal of interest and work by the community already. I think the slightly different thing we're sort of bringing to that is kind of situating it within the history of our LGBTQIA+ work, seeing the connection there, and trying to take it up as not necessarily a 2020-21 moment, but more something that could be an ongoing part of who we are, and tying it to our specific kind of church context. Let's think about it specifically in terms of everything about how our church operates and functions and what we do in worship and how we interact with each other. You know, some of the kind of questions and great ideas we were grappling with within our own meetings about this were, you know, it's one thing to say like, oh yes, we're open to having people from these different communities, but are we really doing everything necessary to make the structures of our church ones where folks from each of these different communities can become leaders, can become people of power within the congregation? Are we really thinking about, are we even being intentional and thoughtful about the fact that there is power within our congregation, just as there is in every organization? And how is that, how is that structured, and how does it come to be? And do we like those answers? Do we feel good about them? Or do we see places where we can do something different to make our community look a little bit different?
And we talked a little bit as well about kind of tokenism, like if someone is a specific demographic, how can we make this not just feel like, well, we're including this one person because we're interested in adding this demographic, but really including everyone from all walks of life, and not making that be kind of like a singular piece of their personality, for example.
Any questions there? Comments about what it is or isn't? Okay, let's move on to number 3 then. And let me make sure, Erica, are you? Yes, I see you there. Okay.
Hi, I'm here. I cannot get my camera to work. I've been trying to troubleshoot it, but it's just not happening. So apologies for my incognito status right now. I'm talking from the black box. So the concept that I want to talk about, or that I'm talking about today, is called something we called radical grace. And if you were to search that term, there's a lot of different kind of things that might come up on Google. Radical grace is it's kind of a shorthand that we kind of came up with when we're talking about really these other congregational priorities. And so what it is the opportunity to think about the fact that you know, we believe as Christians, right, that the power structures that we use to organize our world are worldly power structures, right? And so how can we continue to examine those from the lens of, you know, we believe in Jesus, and you know, the way that Jesus viewed and treated the world in a way that kind of flipped the tables, if you will, right, of these worldly power structures. How can we flip the tables in our church to be radically open to rethinking the way that we are approaching our faith, and the way that we are, I know we said including, right, but how we're including, right, folks from in our community and elsewhere as part of our community. And so what it isn't is probably comfortable. The goal is to think about, what are we doing, right? What is the legacy of colonialization, for example, in our Lutheran faith, right? And how can we change that? Why do we use the word Lord that has such a close connection with slavery as a positive term, right? You know, and so just really thinking about, you know, and maybe it's we reclaim it, right? These are the conversations that we might have, right? To think through, though, what does all of that stuff mean? How do these other things that we are really thinking through in the work that we do with art and so forth, our other social justice priorities, how do those, how do we look at those at kind of the ground level of our church? And so maybe examining our language is one that I brought up because it's one that I'm passionate about. It may also be something like thinking about, well, some churches are open 24/7 for people to come in and talk to God, right? Is that something that we wanted to do? Or do we want to have open hours of the sanctuary outside of Sunday hours? Maybe folks are not comfortable sitting with our congregation, but they still need a quiet place to talk to God, and our sanctuary is a place for that, right? It could be, I guess, so many different things, right? And it's really about examining how we show up in the world. And it's probably not something that is going to be finished in a year or really ever, right? It's probably something that if we decide we want to embark on this, and I think in some ways we already have as a congregation, you know, that we are actively continuing to just really challenge ourselves to kind of keep going at it, if you will. It made, for me, like what I originally thought of was those folks who would go to pride parades with the signs and they'd say like, you know, we're sorry, right? Our church was not kind to you in the past, and we want to apologize for that. I don't know if you folks have seen the pictures of those before, but it'd be like folks who, you know, were from church coming to gay people and saying, hey, we know that the church as a whole has not done right by you, right? And so kind of like coming and coming together to make that right was kind of what originally popped into my head when thinking about radical grace. So it's definitely more nebulous concept, I think, than the other two. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in, but
I'll chime in.
Erica, oh,
Go ahead, Corey, you first.
I was going to say, I'll jump into, I think the other side of this too, there's this radical grace going outward, but also we talked this concept of radical grace going inward, like giving ourselves radical grace to go out and try these things, to get things wrong, for it to be messy, right? For us to learn how to have capacity within ourselves. And I think, you know, again, this overlap with art, right? If we're not building our own capacity for grace for ourselves, we will just hide in our racist ways and continue to hold those in power. But we have to build our capacity for radical grace to be able to go and have hard conversations that we don't know where they're going to go, and have love and grace for ourselves and love and grace for our wider community. So it's really kind of leans into that heritage of our Lutheranism of having grace and forgiveness, right? But for ourselves and for who we've been in the world and how we show up in the world, and you know how that like cycles back around and around to build our own capacities within ourselves and for other people to have that expansiveness. I think that's the other piece.
Comment I was going to make is to tie this back to one of the findings, again, that we have not covered in today's session. But one of the findings that came through from the spiritual gift survey that probably many of you participated in, it's described in a lot of great detail in the report. So you can see a lot of information there. But the kind of really striking takeaway from it, because the response, it was very stark, how different our congregation, how strong our strengths are on sort of organization, administration, giving, kind of very much like front of your head type things. and how for many, not all, but many of us, and definitely for the collective as a whole, not at all high on sort of spiritual care for each other. And that it was very striking, and it also is really consistent. I think we've heard a lot of the same in many different things that have happened, really going back 10 or 15 years, different types of surveys or moments when the congregation said what it was looking for. We've identified that just for whatever reason, we're all drawn to be a part of Central Lutheran Church, and a lot of us are not really wired in that kind of way. And so to me, I think that's part of why this one is so interesting, and also perhaps part of why it's the most inchoate at this point, because how I see this mission priority as different from, say, number 1 is this is the one where it would be about bringing the Spirit to the world and to us in a like divine spiritual way. It's not about letting somebody rent our space for a children's recital, which is like really front of your head kind of executive function. This one is really much more about the presence of the divine and how it can change people's lives. So I think the fact that it is a little bit inchoate probably tracks to the fact that this is an area where many of us don't feel we're very well equipped yet. But I think the important piece is, we want to do better at this. I think just to be people of God, we want to do better than this. We all need this, right? Like that's why we even come to church. So the fact that it may not be an area that we think we're gifted in right now definitely does not mean, oh, we should just not try to do anything like that. It just means like, oh, we need to recognize that we may need to really build our capacity and do some learning, and recognize that we're going to need to take baby steps, and recognize that this may be why it's hard, just because it involves gifts and skills and strengths that we don't think we haven't, those muscles are not super strong for us right now, but we'd like them to be stronger.
Yeah, and I think one thing to point out is I think we already, to an extent, are practicing this, right? We're not starting from zero. I've experienced this towards my own family from this congregation, and felt like we could be ourselves in a way that maybe we couldn't in the outside world. And I think that's part of it too, right? Is understanding that those pieces are already there. It's just, how do we kind of continue to think about, right? Almost like our human fear of opening ourselves up. So I'm just going to throw out like what feels like a really radical idea, but like, what if, and again, this is not something we need to put pen to paper, right? It's just a kind of an example. Like, what if we opened our courtyard for our houseless neighbors to camp and have a safe space to live, instead of having it be a locked, locked up space that folks can't access. I feel like that's the kind of conversation where it could get really uncomfortable. It makes me feel uncomfortable, right? So I can imagine, right, as we were to talk something like that through, that's the kind of stuff that feels like it would be good for us to go there. And as we go into building use, right, like having that spirit as well. I mean, that doesn't mean everything has to be uncomfortable in the world, but just that, can we push ourselves to go there a little bit more?
Questions or reactions on this one?
Erica, that could be a whole forum, but let's not stop with the courtyard. I really, when I was visiting other churches to interview other facilities managers, find out, help write that job description, I learned a lot from when I went to our Redeemers about how they use their parking lot for campers there. It's all a program they have with the city, but we've got a big parking lot, which right now is not generating any income. And as I say, you have to have permits and there are limits and everything, but then you have to think about the logistics with the building.
Mhm.
And I'm so eager to just have these conversations.
Yeah. 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 So that's exciting, right? Like, to me, that's a really exciting possibility that we could be using the space that we already have to further our social justice work in a way that it sounds like there's already a framework
And
possible.
I think that's the way to go, is not to, it is to work with partners, like we've been saying in many conversations. Here's a case where there's a city program that we could tap into. Then we run into the logistical problems in our building, plumbing being number one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means we'd have to be very intent upon doing that and giving up part of our revenue stream. But lots of ideas.
Yeah.
When you brought up the topic of radical grace, I didn't imagine that it was have such physical implementations. I think that it had a different meaning for me. I mean, God's grace is one of the most important things in my faith. I grew up in the Lutheran church, and it wasn't until I took almost 10 years away from the church that I really learned the power of grace. And what a gift it can be for people. One of the things I was impressed about several years ago was, I believe it was a church that, sort of a street church that was started in San Francisco, called Scum of the Earth Church. And the message of grace really brought a lot of people back to life through that process. And it would be good to do something like that, really expose the message of God's grace to people in the Capitol Hill community, even. Not just those that are, not those that are homeless, but people that just live there that aren't having a satisfied life.
Interesting. That's very much what Pastor Duncan is doing in the Vancouver area.
Yeah, thanks, John. That seems exactly right on point with how we've been thinking about that. So I like your sharing there.
I also appreciated this one. We're probably close to time, but I think it was just genius that we grabbed onto Love is Central very early on, and I think it has driven us, rooted us. It's something I fall back to a lot when I think about where are we going, what is our direction, and I feel like this is almost kind of a natural evolution theologically of that notion of love, and pushing us even further with that theme and with that mission, and challenging us a bit beyond what has really provided a lot of direction and kind of guidance. I just feel like it's been wonderful to fall back to that love is central all the time, and this is a really natural kind of evolution, I think, to that.
I just popped into the chat our mission statement, which is like the slightly longer version of Love is Central. I think of Love is Central as like a tagline, maybe. I'm not sure it has a name, but following Christ, sharing God's love for all people. And we definitely, that mission statement was kind of a touchstone for us. And we do view each of these mission priorities as a way to do this. The mission statement itself is like at first you read it and it's so broad, you think, well, that's kind of pointless. It's namby-pamby. What in the world does that mean? I think as I've reflected on it, I like that. I think it's good to have a mission statement that can stick with you sort of forever. It's not about, your 2020 action plan. It's about your orientation. But we did try to structure each of these priorities so that they are, you know, a way to carry forward this mission and make it more graspable. Okay, we just have a few minutes left, so let me touch and turn over then to sort of next steps, what will happen kind of next with these. So first up is at the annual meeting on the 31st, the full report will again be shared. We know, of course, not everyone is able to be here today. And for these to be really taken up, you know, they need to be of the congregation as a whole. It does no one any good to sort of have an idea and have it just, in essence, sit in an electronic, you know, a file somewhere. So it's very important that kind of everybody be thinking and hearing these. That doesn't mean everybody has to do them. It's completely fine if we have an organization where some people feel, you know, I'm passionate and I plug in here. This other piece, you know, that's okay, but it's not my personal passion. Totally fine. But so at the annual meeting, there'll be, again, some form of like just, you know, intro to these. And then we will have the congregation vote on whether to adopt these mission priorities. Then after that, we may have some version, like another version of this faith formation, maybe at another time, just kind of an intro to these for people who couldn't make it today. And at that point, then sort of the work of this discernment team is sort of finished. That was our job to kind of get to that point. Council, though, will be looking at these mission priorities at its upcoming spring retreat in March, and thinking about what would work streams look like to begin carrying these forth. Again, kind of recognizing that we're in a transition period right now. We don't yet have a called pastor, so there probably are kind of some things that seem appropriate for us to do, others that may seem like a big idea that we need to just be thinking about first. But so council will be kind of looking at that in its spring retreat. So certainly if there are areas that you kind of want to share something with council about in terms of you would like to see emphasis on this, or you'd like to help plug into, you know, why, definitely you can start letting council folks know that now, or wait to hear more. That's also perfectly acceptable. Looks like we're getting about to get kicked out here. The only kind of final point I'll make there on next steps is when you read the findings, there may be things that you see in the findings. There are some comments about like church processes. How do we do decision making? Those may be things that you would like to see some work done on, some form of a work stream. But that's a little bit different from what are our mission priorities. And it's just very much kind of TBD. So I would say, you know, if you've got thoughts about those, you want to see them picked up, you know, just let council know that at this point is, I think you're right, kind of course of action. I'm on council, Junie's on council, although about to be off. You know, we can definitely help you know who people on council are. And it's just, we just haven't yet had a chance to think or talk about whether we'll be doing something kind of official on those. It could just be that kind of stating them, putting them out there itself does a lot to get people thinking, oh yeah, that is kind of a process point or something about us. And then finally, again, also the call committee has now been convened. It is their job to think about what type of a leader that we need next. So if anything in here leads you to have thoughts on that line, either in terms of here's something I want to share with the call committee about what I think the right next leader is, or here's a community kind of process that I hope the call community will lead us in. I would like for the call committee to lead us in thinking about a leader. Let the call committee know that. They would be the right people to hear that information. Any final questions or thoughts? Okay, great.
Yep, I think the clapping's appropriate, Jackie. I really want to thank Rebecca for leading this. She did an amazing job of like building us as a team, harnessing, getting our direction, getting it done, keeping us on task. I mean, she did synthesizing this document it was a really great team to be a part of, and to have her leadership on it. So I'm super grateful. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for really like capstoning what has started several years ago. And it was really, really wonderful to see this come to fruition, and that you just took it up and said, yes, let's get it done. And we got it done. So thank you so much, Rebecca.
Yes, yes, indeed.
And I think that this is really an important thing to have done before we call a pastor.
Essential.
I just think it makes a solid bed for us to move forward in calling. And I really appreciate everybody's work on this.
Well, thank you for those kind words, but it definitely was a full team effort at every
Right.
point, including when I gave them assignments super last minute, and they all stepped right in. So it's great. Well, thanks. And of course, more to come. This is just the beginning of these kind of talking about these topics.